of Medina, on August the 7th of 1812, two men, Bernardo Gutierrez Zalara and Augustus McGee, were creating an army, which they would call the Republican Army of the North. That was their self-imposed name. They decided, you have to understand the periods, what was going on around the world. Well, we had the First Revolution, we had the American Revolution. People were rising up and saying, by what right do these kings have to rule over us? Who gave them that right? Remember the Enlightenment period? We had Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We had all these English philosophers that were bringing up these points. Who are these kings? Who? And of course the kings would argue, well, we rule over you because God said we could. The audacity, right? Well, that's why they had revolutions in the French Revolution. How many of you all remember the days of Rousseau? Rousseau's reign of terror in France. We see these people here from the beginning, they were reading those books from these philosophers that were arguing, by what right do y'all have to rule over us? That's why Charles XVI was beheaded, and his wife Marie Antoinette. Because people were tired of this rule. Well, all of that came here to Texas. That's why the people in Texas revolted. Not once, twice. And Texas has had two republics. The first Republic of Texas was founded right here in San Antonio on April the 6th of 1813, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, this Republican Army of the North marched south with the intent of freeing Texas from Spanish rule. They took it upon themselves after Bernardo Gutierrez Zalara was given the orders to go to the United States and try to seek help. Unbelievable. He didn't know any English. He had money in his pocket, but he lost it. He manages to cross the Sabine River where there were people waiting for him. They had heard that he was coming. And they helped him out. General Wilkerson was one of his biggest supporters. General Wilkerson had heard that Bernardo Gutierrez Zalara was on his way to try to seek help from the United States, not knowing a word of English. But he was able to get the help that he needed. Travels all the way up to Washington, D.C., where he meets another revolutionary by the name of Álvarez de Toledo. He and Álvarez de Toledo would have many different talks. They would gather outside of Washington, and they would have long walks, and would talk about the revolution in Mexico. Mexico was already revolting against the Spanish. And after Father Miguel Hidalgo was captured and executed, the revolution falls into the hands of a black priest, Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon. Now, why does all that have to do with the Battle of Medina? Because the Battle of Medina was part of the Mexican War of Independence. And Texas took part in that role. They played a big role. The biggest battle ever fought in Texas was the Battle of Medina. Historians all agree. It was bigger than the Alamo, San Jacinto, and Goliad combined. More lives would be lost in this one event than every other battle in Texas. It was a fight for the right to self-determination. And the people would pay a tremendous price for the right to be free. So, as Augustus McGee and Bernardo Gutierrez Zalara crossed the Sabine River under the emerald green flag of the First Texas Republic, this flag would fly over Texas for a year and 11 days. So anyway, Augustus McGee was able to recruit 142 Americans and 158 Tejano volunteers to come to San Antonio and create our independence. And that is in the La Gaceta, which I have a copy of here. It was reported in this newspaper that 142 American volunteers and 158 Tejanos with their green flag crossed the Sabine River into Texas to try and win the independence of Texas. And that is Father Miguel Hidalgo, and this is Gutierrez de Lara. So Augustus McGee recruits 142 American volunteers. Now, there's 3 books on this subject. Julia Catherine Garrett, in her book, Green Flag Over Texas, she says that there were so many Texans volunteering to go fight for the independence of Texas. But then Robert Donhoff and Ted Schwartz write their new book and say, well, actually it's me. In my book, this is what I say. I said, now wait a minute, this is 1812. There aren't any Texans yet. There's no Texans living in Texas. We all know that. It came into 1821. So, if she was still alive, I would have written her a letter and said, I think you've got your history a little wrong. She was a professor of history. But she still got it wrong. And that's what Dr. Felix Almaraz says. Unless we go and do some primary research, and we use somebody else's research, they could have made a mistake, and we're just going to repeat it. And I'm going to give you an example of that here in just a few minutes, because this historical marker is wrong. Now, Augustus McGee and Gutierrez de Lara march all the way to Goliad. They capture Trinidad, they capture Nacogdoches, mainly without a fight. When they arrive in Goliad, the Presidio guards had fled. So the Presidio was empty. And they decided that they were going to be there for the winter. And that winter was a very harsh winter. Some people even think it was part of a little ice age. So they decided to camp there until the spring. So we would have the 4-month siege of the Presidio in Goliad. So the Republican Army was pretty comfortable. They were inside, they had supplies, they had cannons that were left behind by the fleeing Spanish. So the army from San Antonio, specifically the Alamo de Paras Company, and the rest of the soldiers that they recruited, the generals, the governors, Manuel Salcedo and Simón Herrera, would have a siege that lasted 4 months. Eventually, both sides were running out of supplies. So they decide to abandon the siege and go to San Antonio. As the Republicans were following the Spanish decided to stop and ambush the Republican Army. Well, it failed because the Republican Army would send a scout on both sides to try to find out what the Spaniards were doing. And it just so happens that they realized that the Spaniards were planning a trap. The Republicans, however, decided, we're going to go around them. And they ambushed them from the rear. It was a big battle. About 300 were killed. The point is that the Republicans were winning every battle, every skirmish, up until the Battle of Medina. They won all of them, except the one that counted. Now, they arrived on April the 1st of 1813, and the governors surrender San Antonio. They walk out there. They don't want their city destroyed, so they surrender to the Republican Army of the North. Augustus McGee didn't make it, though. He suffered a mysterious death in Goliad. But it really wasn't a mysterious death. He was actually murdered by the Tejano contingency. He was too eager to surrender. He was seen having dinner with the governors, Herrera and Salcedo, and they had suggested that if they surrendered Gutierrez de Lara, that they would let them free. But the Tejano contingency said, absolutely. You're going to surrender our leader? We don't think so. So they revolted and said, no, 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 nobody's going to be turned over to the Spanish. 2 days later, there was a mark on his body. I suspect that he was suffocated, and that's how he died. Now, without him, the leadership falls into the hand of Perry. Colonel Perry would lead the Republican Army of the North into San Antonio, where San Antonio surrenders on April the 1st of 1813. And then 6 days later, on April the 6th of 1813, Texas would have its first written Declaration of Independence. 11 days later, on the 17th, Texas would have its first written Constitution. Now, I usually bring copies, but that's a lot of paperwork. So if you're really interested, you could go to my Facebook page, where if you just click on the First Republic and the first Constitution, you'll find them there. So we had our first Republic of Texas. Of course, I'm still fighting with the legislature, which I have done, and also the State Board of Education, where I testified 5 years ago. I testified before the State Board of Education 5 years ago, and I was successful in getting the Battle of Medina included in the curriculum to be taught in the 7th grade, but as an elective. I do know that the high school down the street, Lozoya, they teach it there. Because this is our history. This is local history. We need to teach it in all our local schools. Because these people fought and they died for wanting to be free. Now,
Yes.
no, thank you. Now, the Republican Army of the North, while they were there in San Antonio, they heard that the Mexican Spanish government was sending an army under the leadership of Joaquin de Arredondo. And they knew about Joaquin de Arredondo. They didn't call him the butcher for nothing. That was his nickname. The reason he was called that is because the previous year in the Yucatan Peninsula, he had actually slaughtered hundreds of Mayan Indians for daring to revolt against his Spanish king. And they knew he was coming. So the question in my mind has always been, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they regroup and get more men, get better weapons? No. They decided, we're going to go out and we're going to take him on. We've defeated all of these other armies. We can defeat him too. They were overconfident. Many of the American volunteers by this time had left. After Gutierrez de Lara declared our independence, they was trying to create a government. Many of the Americans did not get a position in the new government, and they got upset. So a lot of them left. But they were replaced by the Native Americans. Half-breed Chief Charlie Rolls brings his troops, his Indian troops, from the Trinity River. And they would be in the Battle of Medina. Now, we know they were at the Battle of Rocio, because the people that were there left us the information. They said, yes, we had a lot of Native Americans participate in the independence of Texas. And some people say, you mean Indians fought for them? Yes, they did. These Native Americans volunteered to go with the Republican Army of the North. And they were at the Battle of Medina. They were at the Battle of Rocio. They too had been caught up in this experience by the Americans. It was actually an experiment on this new kind of government. Remember, we had all been ruled by kings, but the Americans were not. The Republican Army of the North is camped in San Antonio. They hear that Arredondo is coming, and they decide to march out and face it. And they did just that. There were a couple of soldiers. Now, the Spanish army, back in the old days when the armies would line up and shoot at each other until one side ran off, right? But they didn't fight like that anymore. They knew they were fighting indigenous people. They hid behind trees. So that's what they decided to do. We're going to hide behind these trees. When the Republican Army of the North sent out a few scouts to try to find the Spanish army was doing the same thing. They had sent out soldiers searching for the enemy. And they encountered the enemy. Robert Donhoff in his book says that a trigger-happy American fired upon these scouts, revealing their location. So their ambush was no good. But Arellano, when he heard those shots, and he would write in his report that he was just lucky that he was on high ground. There was a line of trees and an open field in front of him. So he had ordered one of his soldiers to go out there with 500 cavalrymen to make it look like they're facing the army, but to lure them in. Not to fight them, just bring them in. Fire a couple of shots, but bring them into the ambush the Spaniards had ready for them. So the Spanish soldiers were ordered, do not fire until they're within 40 yards. And this was a well-trained Spanish army, and they obeyed their orders. So imagine this, 1,830 combatants were lined up with 7 cannons. 7 cannons. So as soon as they're within 40 yards, the order goes out to fire. Boom! Immediately, 300 Republicans fall dead or mortally wounded. But it wasn't over. The Republican Army of the North falls back, shaken and scared, but they're still willing to fight. Colonel Miguel Menchaca, and it was Colonel Miguel Menchaca, J.R. Edmondson, in his book on the Alamo, he says that Colonel Miguel Menchaca had been ordered to withdraw his men by Alvarez de Toledo. And it is said, according to J.R. Edmondson, that Colonel Miguel Menchaca responded that the battle has started and Tejanos do not withdraw. Can you imagine having that in school? So, what the Tejano cavalry did, they charged to the left, trying to outflank the enemy. That didn't work. Arellano had placed his cavalry on both ends of his line, and then they attacked to the right side of the line, again failing, but having heavy casualties. And it was not until Colonel Miguel Menchaca was shot through the neck that he falls mortally wounded that the Tejano cavalry became discouraged, but yet as discouraged as they were, they charged twice more. The end result was that very few survived. It is believed that with General Arellano, a gust of wind came across the field and it blew all the smoke and the gunpowder off, and he realized that he was winning. So he orders a cavalry charge, a bayonet charge, mind you. But there weren't many left. And the ones that were left were executed. There were no survivors on the battlefield. 900 bodies, we believe, were left out there to rot for over 9 years. Under penalty of death, the people were ordered, do not go out there. Your sons and husbands were traitors. They did not deserve a Christian burial. And the people were scared, and they obeyed. That's why the battle site, we don't know where it's at. Later on, the surveyor, Pedro Walker, he says that he saw 2 miles worth of bones by the time they went out there. Jose Antonio Navarro mentioned that when he was a kid, he saw a sign that said that here are the bones of the people that fought, like Leonidas. Leonidas and the Spartans that fought, Thermopylae, Battle of Thermopylae, between the Spartans and the Persians. Somebody had carved on there that here lies the bodies of these soldiers. And just like at Thermopylae, they fought to the last man. So we know it happened here, somewhere here. But that tree is gone.
So Navarro didn't say he saw it near his ranch?
He said it was south of the river. south of the Medina River. And that's where we have been concentrating our searches for over 11 years. But I wasn't the only one. Robert Thornhoff searched, Ted Schwartz did, and then it's my turn to try to find this battle. So, in a nutshell, these almost 1,400 people died as a result of the battle and its aftermath. But see, after the battle, it still wasn't over. Arellano orders 500 cavalry to charge into San Antonio and arrest anyone suspected of supporting the revolution. So they arrest about 400 Tejanos, place them in a building so tight that 17 suffocate in the scorching heat of the night. The women, see, no one would be spared the wrath of Joaquin de Arellano. The women, about 400 mothers, wives, and daughters of the Republicans were rounded up and placed in a makeshift building that would become known later on as La Quinta. The women were brutally and repeatedly assaulted, forced on their knees from 4 in the morning. Okay, we're all adults. Raped. They were forced on their knees from 4 in the morning till 10 at night to grind the corn, to make las tortillas to feed the despised Spanish army. And through the windows of their makeshift prisons, the mothers could see their children searching for food. I mean, it was a disaster. Texas would almost be depopulated. But we survived. Arellano, 6 months later, issues a general amnesty for people to come back. Some people never came back. They went to Louisiana. People that stayed, however, lived in terror for many, many years. So, 23 years later, we have another revolution. And with the memory of this revolution in their minds, do you think they were crazy to fight in another revolution? Absolutely not. Well, some people did fight in the next revolution. But the majority of the inhabitants had had enough. They had lost a son, a husband, a father, an uncle, and they were not ready to take on another revolution. Thank you all very much. Of course, I have a lot more to say, but you all have a business meeting, and all right. Thank you all very much. Now this event is happening May the 1st, San Pedro Creek, and this is y'all's invitation to come. Hope everybody has one of these.
Which creek?
San Pedro Creek,
San
the
Pedro
park?
Creek. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We're going to do the reenactment of the founding of Mission San Antonio de Valero, which was formerly known as Mission San Francisco de Solano. So what they actually did was they shut down the mission called San Francisco de Solano. It had already been founded. They transferred it on May the 1st, 1718 to the San Pedro Creek. And this is a scene that we took last year at San Pedro Creek. This is Dr. Felix Almaraz. He is the historian that will lead the actual ceremony, taking possession of the land and founding Mission San Antonio de Valero. All they did was rename it. So y'all can come, and this is for y'all, but this is also something that we need to look at for our event back in December. So pretty much, basically, that's all I've got, but this is the event that's happening in about 10 days on the 1st. We can get together later on and work on this event for our event here in November. And as I mentioned before, it could be the biggest event that the Tricentennial hasn't even thought about. See, one of the reasons that we are here is obviously because your society was so interested in it, and we have the support of pretty much everyone. But we do need to get together about uniforms, promoting this event. And with the tricentennial, it's gonna get a lot of publicity, a lot. So, and I'm excited about it because the whole idea is to get kids involved. They need to participate in this event. We have 128 students coming from the south side to this event. We hired 3 bus loads, so it cost us $170 per bus load, but they're bringing their choir, the band, and they'll be playing music. Plus, we are bringing extra uniforms, courtesy of Bill Millett. He has a lot of uniforms, so we're gonna dress up the students. And they're actually gonna participate. They need to know that the founding of San Antonio began in 1718, not 1836. So,
First album.
we should do the same thing here with the students. Get them involved.
Yes, we're going to talk to Mr. No.
So, when I spoke to the kids up in Austin, they came to San Marcos when we did the reenactment in San Marcos. And it was a drama class. They had already agreed, so I went there and I showed them exactly what we were going to do. And they were so excited. They are going to remember that battle forever because they participated. And this is what I see. You know, that they are going to know more about this battle by participating than reading about it in a known book.
Yeah, most people don't know the details.
I
It
know.
was a very complicated battle.
Yes.
It was spread out over, I think, 5 crossings, different crossings of the Medina. And the actual battle, as I understand it, ended up with McGee's group stuck in the sand on the other side of the river, boggy.
Well, the thing is, Augustus McGee suffered a mysterious death in Goliad. But it wasn't mysterious at all. He was murdered by the Tejano contingency. It's always been taught that he died a mysterious death. He could have had pneumonia. But the thing is that he passed away. There was no mark on his body. So I've always suspected that Augustus McGee was just too easy to give up. They wanted him to surrender Gutierrez de Lara. And the Tejano community said, absolutely not. He is our leader. We are going to defend him. And the Tejano community was the biggest contingency.
Yes.
We had about 300 Americans and 200 Lipan Apaches. And they were not about to turn him over. So I have always suspected that he was probably smothered. That's the only logical conclusion that I can come up with. No marks on his body, and he wasn't sick.
What
anyway-
about poison? What about poison?
That could have been true too. He could have been poisoned. Anyway, he did not survive. So the Republican Army of the North arrives here in San Antonio on April the 1st, and they surrender. San Antonio surrenders to the Republican Army of the North. The governors Manuel Saucedo and Simón Herrera were murdered, but then by April the 5th, we had a constitution. And on the 6th, we had the Declaration of Independence. 10 days later, we had the first written constitution. But then things began to fall apart. On August the 18th, 1813, Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara had already been deposed. He flees to Louisiana, and that's when Colonel Perry takes over under the direction of Gutierrez de Lara. So when they arrived, when the Spanish army arrived, the Republicans already had scouts looking for him because they had heard that he was on his way. So instead of having the battle take place in San Antonio, the Republicans decided, let's just go find him out on the battlefield. And they located him right around in this area, somewhere off of Bruce and Applewhite Road. Oh, as a matter of fact, I just did another dig 2 weeks ago. We got another rancher that gave us permission, course, we didn't find anything, but it's on the, Bruce and Applewhite section where we believe the battle may have happened. And you're right, we don't know absolutely where it happened, we just think that it happened there. But it was the biggest and the bloodiest battle. And I have been doing this reenactment now for 11 years. And when we get out there on the battle, on the site, the kids are excited, they're gonna wanna know what they need to do. I said, don't worry, I've been doing this for a long time. We're gonna be just fine. You just remember, you got shot. And when you fall to the ground, play it up, go, ah! You should have seen the drama class in Austin when I was explaining to them what they were going to do.
And they took that group into San Antonio and killed them in front of the families. And
Yeah.
what about that?
Yes, well, it becomes too lengthy. I explained that. I explained that even as tragic as it was still not over. 400, Arellano orders 400 cavalry to charge into San Antonio and arrest anyone suspected of supporting the rebels. So they arrested about 400 Tejanos, placed them in a building so tight, remember this is August, that 17 suffocated in the scorching heat of the night.
Mm.
The following day, 30 were taken out and executed
In front of their families, right?
in front of their families. And after that, 10 a day were shot until the total number 327.
Mm.
No one would be spared the wrath of Arellano, not even the women and the children. About 400 wives, mothers, and daughters of the Tejanos are imprisoned in a makeshift prison called La Quinta. Many of them were repeatedly and brutally raped. Now I cleaned it up a little bit for the children. Several of them died as a result of the brutality. And through the windows of their makeshift prisons, the mothers could see their children searching for food and shelter. And I'm explaining all this. And then the women, in the meantime, the women are gathering up their loved ones and they're crying. I can guarantee you there won't be a dry eye though. If we do it right, it's going to be tremendous. And I've done it for 11 years.